Hey everybody, what's happening? I think we're live. Whoops, I almost pulled my computer off the desk. Dan Chinder here on Drum Talk TV Live with Dr. Nadia Azar, who is in her office on campus, Nadia? At Windsor University in Canada. So I'm going to speak kind of loud, folks, so that I can get through the language barrier, because Nadia's in Canada, eh?
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Wonderful, thanks. I had a little technical thing, as you know, right before we started, and I'm bouncing off the walls, throwing crap everywhere, yelling, screaming. But we got it all worked out. So, folks, tell us where you are watching from. We got some great conversation, and we'd love for you to participate. I'm in Globe, Arizona, tiny mountain town 100 miles east of Phoenix, up in the mountains, where almost everyone owns a pickup truck. But I've never seen anything in the back of any of these pickup trucks. I don't get it. And as we said, Nadia is in Canada. Where exactly is Windsor University?
Windsor is right across the border, the U.S. border from Detroit, Michigan.
That's right, yes.
And actually, the University of Windsor campus is like the Ambassador Bridge, which is one of the two main border crossings in Windsor, is practically on our campus. There are parts of it that are almost directly underneath it, and my office is right at the entrance to it. So it's really easy for you to get across the border.
That's
cool. Or at least to access it. Yeah.
Yeah, and let's look at the monitor and give some shout outs. Melissa LaFranchi is on board. I think the first one, actually. Hey, Melissa, how's it going? Say hi to Peyton. Everybody else, tell us where you're watching from. And we have a special announcement, Nadia and I do. But we're going to wait till a few more people have chimed in. Oh, and I'm going to share this somewhere. While Gilbert, our associate producer, is also sharing this all over. And friends, if you have drummers who are friends, well, yeah, that works. If you have drummers who are friends who are drummers, people who know drummers who know people who might have injuries like carpal tunnel, tendonitis, neck pain, shoulder pain, sciatica, anything like that, let them know by sharing this, because we're going to have some conversation. We'd like you to chime in. If you follow Drum Talk TV avidly, you've seen the study that Nadia has done on drumming injuries. Many of our fans participated in that. We thank you for that. It's an ongoing process, and Nadia came out here to Drum Talk TV headquarters in September, and for 3 days we did a live special mini-series where she hooked me up to special armbands that measured my caloric burn. Is that a word? Caloric burn.
Caloric, I guess.
Yeah, and heart rate. And that was fun, because I always wondered, and people always wonder, how much, I must be burning off 10,000. Not quite. I was surprised that I wasn't burning as much as I thought. However, I play a lot more economically than I played 20, 30 years ago. In my 20s, my set was set up differently. Things were farther apart. I was much more, whereas now I'm just kind of economize my movement. I don't have to smash as hard to play as loud as I want. So I was surprised that the calorie burn was in the 600s for about 42, 45 minutes, Nadia, something like that, right?
Yeah, I think one set was a little less than an hour. The other two were a little over. So yeah, it averaged out, I think, to about 10 calories a minute, which is pretty with what I've seen with other people. So
and I thought, before we did this, I didn't want any coaching on previous results, and I kind of guessed, and I thought it'd be more like 100 calories per minute. I mean, all that working out, and I think my brain is still in that state of when I was much more physical when I played, and I don't realize until this learning experience, and we filmed it with other cameras as well. In fact, Gilbert is editing the Led Zeppelin songs right now.
Cool.
So we'll have those up soon. Yeah, but I think not till I got those numbers from you and we talked about it and I reviewed it that I realized, wow, I don't move around as much as I thought. Sometimes it feels like it. But I'm just sharing this, and we will check comments. We want to know who has any sort of drumming injury. And Nadia, tell me if I'm leaving something out. So I'm thinking of, I don't know if arthritis counts, but certainly carpal tunnel, tendonitis, sciatica, lower back pain, maybe any kind of back pain, shoulder and neck pain. Headaches don't count, because that might be from your lead singer and not from drumming. So we're not going to count headaches. But am I leaving anything out that we can maybe have people chime in and say what they have? Because I'd like to see what the most common response is that we get, first of all.
Okay, well, I can tell you that the most common, one of the questions on my survey was, if you did receive a diagnosis from a doctor for a drumming-related injury, what was that diagnosis? And overwhelmingly, the most commonly reported diagnosis was there was tendinitis. Now, they didn't specify where, but just tendinitis in general. Mm-hmm. And carpal tunnel syndrome came up quite a bit as well. But really anything that can be attributed to developing as a result of your playing can be a drumming injury. For example, even headaches. If you are one of those drummers that your neck is always moving or you hold it in a certain posture, you can actually get headaches from muscular tension or irritation of nerves coming out of your spine and traveling through your neck muscles and things. So I didn't see any reports of that, but to say that headaches don't count, I wouldn't quite say that, because you could actually get headaches from the way your neck posture is.
But I think you'll have a headache from your lead singer before that takes effect. That's just what I think from experience. You mentioned something that is interesting to me. I'd like to get your professional take on this. And folks, hang in there. We have a big announcement for you, but hang in there. And chime in on my question to Nadia as well. So you mentioned posture. And if I use the words poor posture, is it not poor posture if that posture works for that person? So, for instance, you've had the pleasure to work with a lot of professional drummers. You came here and you worked with me for a few days and saw how I sit. You've gotten with Tim Alexander, Mike Mangini. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Casey Carrillo, a lot of big-time drummers. I'm sure because our bodies are shaped differently, because our setups are different, because of whatever other lifestyle factors, our posture is different when we play. Have you ever noticed in certain drummers, or maybe most drummers, like, wow, that's not really good posture, but obviously I sit the way I do because I'm comfortable doing that when I play. So is that right or wrong if it works? Or conversely, could it seem to work, but it also be causing an injury? Or could it be the result of an injury? Like, how does that all break out? I know there's a lot of pronged questions in there, but to me, it's an interesting rabbit hole.
There is a lot of parts to it, and it is a bit of a rabbit hole, and it can also be a bit of a chicken and egg situation. So let me say first, yes, in a sense, what works for one person might not work for another person. So in general, there are some guidelines, I suppose, in terms of what good posture would look like, but that specifically to everyone. I mean, everyone's different. You can't. There's no one size fits all kind of thing for everyone that's going to fit everyone. Right. So yes, in some ways, it really is very individual, the way you sit, the way you hold sticks and things like that. That being said, so you might think something is working for you because you don't have an injury now, but injuries, especially repetitive strain injuries, take time to develop. There's two ways that an injury happens, and really, actually, there's only one way an injury happens, and it's when the tissue, there's a force that's applied to the tissue that it can't tolerate. It doesn't have the strength to tolerate it, and it breaks down. But there's two sort of ways in which that happens. One is like when you break your leg. You have a really high force, high energy, and it breaks the bone, and you have an injury.
I got the chills just hearing that.
Right. That's probably not going to happen when you're playing the drums. But what can happen when you're playing the drums is if you are assuming a poor posture for a long period of time, that's putting your tissues in such a way that they are they're moving in a certain way, or you're holding a particular posture, or your tendons are rubbing in a certain way. What happens is the tissue starts to break down over time, and that original force that it could tolerate becomes less and less and less, until one day that posture that you've always been assuming that you thought was doing no harm now all of a sudden causes a problem. We hear about stuff like this in work-related injuries, where someone's, hurts their back at work, and you say, well, how did that happen? They're like, I don't know, I just bent over at my desk to pick up my pencil and out blew my back. So,
but
no,
that's
not
from
what
an
happened.
accumulative condition, you're saying, right?
It's
that
from a
weakens,
cumulative
makes it susceptible.
condition over time, wearing down the tissues that one day something that seemed to be really innocuous, something that wouldn't normally cause an injury, did. And it's not because of that particular issue, it's because over time your tissues wore down.
That makes sense. I'm hesitating because I don't know why I sometimes hesitate. I don't want to offend anyone. Screw them! No, my question is, just being overweight as a drummer and sitting and going through those motions. Now, those motions vary for every drummer depending on the kind of music, the setup, blah, blah, blah. But does being overweight make one more susceptible to injuries drumming or not necessarily?
Oh, that is a really good question. And to be 100% honest, I don't know. And I'm trying to think back to anything I've read in workplace literature about someone who if being overweight predisposes you to workplace-related injuries. And I don't have a good answer for you. I don't know.
And I think the last thing you mentioned, Nadia, probably depends on the job. So sitting at a desk, probably not. Up and down from a tractor or forklift or out of a truck or whatever, he or she, maybe with the weight coming down on the leg. There's so many factors that I guess that'd be hard to answer without a specific study on just that, maybe.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about it and just thinking about something like lifting. So the whole principle behind proper lifting technique is that you keep the object that you're lifting close to your body. So by reducing the distance away that you're holding, by holding it closer to you, you're reducing the load on your back. Mm-hmm. So for somebody who is significantly overweight, they wouldn't be able to get that load as close to their spine, even close into their body, as someone who's not overweight would. So that would increase the load on their back just by the nature of holding. They have to hold it out farther. How that applies to playing the drums, I'm not sure that it does. I guess lifting and carrying your gear, of course, we talked before about how lugging gear could be a risk factor for injury because you're lifting heavy loads. They're bulky and awkward, and you're carrying them and you're getting in small places and things like that. So, that could be a risk factor. But in terms of just the impact of obesity on playing itself and whether that could lead to an injury, that I don't know.
That makes sense. And is there do you know if there's any injuries that are more common amongst men versus women? And I know that while our bodies are different physiologically, of course, at the same time, men and women's bodies vary so much that you could easily see a woman who has more of a manly body, depending on the size and shape of their bone structure, and men who are, I don't think I look like a woman, but I'm a small guy, and I've been getting smaller over the last 2 years. I'm down to like 150 pounds. I'm really super lean versus someone who's much more huskier, but you could find a girl who's much more bigger boned and bigger than I am. But aside from that, have you discovered that there's any one injury more prone to women than men or men than women when it comes to playing the drums?
That I'm not far enough into my data yet. Okay. And especially too, given that my study sample was 90% male, I'm not sure that I'm really going to be able to be very confident in any sex differences that I see. Because there was such a small proportion of women.
Well, I've shared this interview while we've been talking into a drumming group on Facebook I belong to called Drummer Girls United. I'm the token male, the founder.
I belong there too.
Yeah, you do. And Tammy Mitchell-Woods was kind enough to invite me into the group. And hey, drummer sisters, how's it going? Perhaps in the future there's a study you can do that only allows women to answer the questions, just to kind of raise the population of those answers to kind of meld with part of another study or something. I know there's all sorts of guidelines and ethics and everything was studied. So I don't know if that's totally the right way to do it, but I think that there's a neat question there to be answered for men and women so that they know, what they might be more prone to. Because if we just say in general, but hiddenly there's something that women might be more prone to, and then they don't know about it, I think that's would be a good gem to reveal, if you will, in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's some evidence, not in drumming literature, but there is some evidence that women are more susceptible to carpal tunnel syndrome than men are.
Really?
Yeah, and that has, I believe, something to do with the size of just our bones. I mean, carpal tunnel obviously is in your wrist. Right. Women are smaller, so there's less room in there, but our tendons are also smaller. So, but there's that. But then in almost any study that I've read of, differences in reporting of injuries, is that women tend to report injuries more often than men.
That makes sense to me.
They're more likely to, I don't want to use the word admit to it, but they're more open. I
think that's okay. I think that's fair.
They're more likely to report that, yes, I have had an injury, whereas men are less likely to do the same.
There's a macho molecule in there that is overriding everything. There's a pride thing, and I think most men don't want to admit that,
But even in terms of drumming injuries, or injuries in musicians in general, getting musicians to own up to or admit to having suffered an injury is really problematic in this group. And it makes sense why, because, as a musician, there's always someone else looking for your spot. There's always someone else looking for the gig. And so if you can't, I've read studies of, musicians are really, really reluctant to talk about an injury or seek help for an injury because they're concerned that they will be replaced.
Right. And that goes with a lot of workplace mentality. Someone doesn't want to admit that maybe they were just diagnosed as bipolar, or maybe they've got some other sort of condition that will then be perceived as, they're weak, or they're on their way out, or they're not as reliable, and those same words, those same phrases can go with exactly what you're saying for a musician.
There's a stigma to it, and it's really unfortunate because, like with any health condition, stigma is preventing musicians from getting the help that they need. Right. And that's really never a good thing. So
interesting. What I'd like to do now, and thank you for all of that, very helpful. What I'd like to do now is make our announcement and then sort of do like a mini version of what we will be doing when we do what we're going to announce, and that is we're going to open this up to like a quick mini forum. And so let's start with the announcement. The announcement is that Dr. Nadia Azar is going to be joining the Drum Talk TV NAMM Show coverage team in January at the NAMM Show at the Anaheim Convention Center for the first time. We're honored to have you on board and coming. And for the most part, thank you. It's going to be our 7th NAMM Show in a row. We haven't missed one since I started the company. And Nadia's going to be mainly at our booth with me, where I'll be most of the time. Our booth number, write it down, folks, so you can come by and say hi. But if you're not going to the NAMM Show, don't tune out. We're going to show you how you can still be involved online. This is really cool. This is what's so cool about the world we live in today. So the booth number is 6732, and Nadia's going to be there. She's going to not only be interviewing separately some of the guest drummers that I'll be interviewing. She'll be interviewing them about their injury experience and things like that. But we're also going to have an open forum where you can visit our booth during certain times. It'll be posted, and we'll have like an open discussion where whoever's gathered around the booth can participate in this discussion about injuries they've had. And it's important to understand that doctor, and the reason doctor is there for Dr. Nadia Azar, she's a professor of kinesiology. She's not an MD. She's not a proctologist, so she can't help you with your lead singer problem there. She's a kinesiologist, which is the study of body movement, basically, right?
Yeah.
So there are certain questions that she may not be able to ask simply because while they will seem related to a drumming injury or your physiology, they're not in the area of kinesiology. If it has to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nadia, but if it has to do with things like nerve endings going numb, or things that don't have to do with those sorts of things, or a bulged disc, or a broken finger, things like that. So what's cool about this experience, every single day at the NAMM Show, we're going to do this twice a day at our booth. If you're not at the NAMM Show and you can't make it, this is all going to be streamed live. And the producer who's going to be doing those segments is going to be we'll be taking questions from the online audience as much as we will be from the audience on site. And I just saw something happen. I wonder if the picture's going to go away for a moment. So what we'd like to do is open that up to now, and our associate producer watching this, Gilbert, will help make sure I don't miss any questions. So if you have drumming I almost say industries.
Because you're used to talking about drumming industry.
Right, and if you have a drumming industry, get with me. I'll teach you how to market it properly. But if you have a drumming injury, tell us what it is, and go ahead and submit a question right here in the comments live. If you're watching this on the archive, Nadia and I will go through this post a couple times over the next 2 or 3 days. So I'm going to take a look real quick, Nadia, and see what I have to throw your way.
And so I just want to comment in on what you were saying about
Sure.
The questions. So I guess just what I want people to understand is that given that I'm not a medical doctor, I cannot give medical advice. So they can ask questions, or we can talk about different injuries, and some injuries might be relevant to drumming related injuries, others might not be, but the main thing to take away from it is that I'm not dispensing medical advice. Anything that we're talking about is something that I've come across through my research or through the reading I've done of the research literature. But it's not, it should not be construed necessarily, or at all really, as medical advice. Like you say, I'm not an MD, I am a PhD. So those are two very different things.
Yeah.
And so I mean, but if a question comes up that I can't answer, or that I think is more medical in nature,
then I'll just make up an answer. No. I'm kidding. Andrew Hiwa asks, will there be access to this video at a later date? So every time we do a live interview, or I do my live vlogs on the Drum Talk TV Facebook page, as soon as they're done, they post to the page, just like uploading any other video. So you can go to our videos album and look through there and see previous interviews, or see this later if you want to review it, show it to someone else, share it, and share it around now if you'd like to. Even if you don't like to, do it anyways. Uncle Dan says so. So yeah, they're always available. And let's see who else might have questions or an injury. So Raj Karnikar, she says, I had a transplant 1.5 months ago, and I'm trying to get back to my normal routine, like 3-hour bar gigs, practice maybe. He's in Nepal, by the way, I happen to know. An hour for the beginning after 3 months. 2 months about to complete and 1 month left. Will it affect my health? So the question is, Ashish, are you asking if getting back in that routine will affect your health because of the transplant? We don't know what the transplant is. And again, neither of us are MDs, so I don't know. It depends on what the transplant is. But go ahead and answer that. Tell us what the transplant is, and maybe clarify your question. Let's just see who else is on board with a question. So Melissa says Peyton, I believe is she 16 now, Melissa? Has been having pain with her wrist that goes up her arm. Sounds like sciatica of the arm almost, or something similar. Went to a wrist specialist yesterday, and after viewing her MRI and X-ray, he said there was tendonitis and a small cyst on both her wrists. Is that possibly caused from repetitive motion of drumming?
Tendonitis could be, certainly.
Is the cyst related to the tendonitis or unrelated?
The cyst?
Yeah.
No, that sounds like, and I don't know a lot about this condition, but there is such a thing called de Quervain. No, I'm sorry. Hold on. That's a different one. But I have heard of, they're called ganglionic cysts, and they are cysts that form I believe, over the tendon sheets. So I have heard of that, and also in the context of a repetitive strain injury. So that definitely is possible that it was related to the repetitive motion. Certainly tendinitis, that's something that could, from the repetitive wrist flexion and extension, or even I've noticed there's a lot of, especially if drummers hold in I think it's the French matched grip,
Right.
There's a lot of motion this way.
Yeah.
So there's, those tendons running through your wrist, there's not a lot of space in there. And if they're, rubbing on the bones or rubbing together, that certainly can create irritation, and which leads to the inflammation in the tendons, which is tendinitis. So that is definitely a possibility.
Okay. Thank you. That's awesome. Let's see if anyone else has a question. Cheers from Mexico, Dallas, more Mexico. Maybe people are just shy about this subject. I'm surprised that there's not more questions. I have
talked about how people don't want to admit to having injuries.
I know. So if you want, folks, you could say, so I got this drummer friend, and she's experiencing, however you want to phrase it. While you folks work up your courage and submit a question about this, I'm dwelling on this posture issue. And not that I want to, beat it to death, but there's something that's really interesting to me in that subject, because I often see drummers, I think, wow, how can he sit like that? Where they're really high or they're really low, where their waist is lower than their knees. I mean, it boggles my mind, the variations of how we all sit. And I've noticed that there is not a common denominator related to size. So it's not like all taller people sit like this or all shorter people sit like that. It's all over the map. So kind of dovetailing off of my previous question on that, is there maybe not forgetting about this, but is there a right way or a wrong way for a drummer to sit, depending on their physiology, depending on the size of their torso compared to their lower body, depending on how they're set up? Like, would you, in answering that question, if it's yes, would you be able to look at a drummer and say, I bet they'd be more comfortable if they raised their throne like 3 inches, or lowered it, or lowered their snare drum, or is there anything there that you've ever noticed or thought of yourself?
I can't say that there's a right way for a person to sit based on their posture. I mean, I can look at the way someone sits and think, maybe they should raise or lower a little bit, that sort of thing. Maybe sit closer or bring certain elements that they're using more often closer to them. But then, a perfect case in point is Todd Sucherman of Styx. He's a fantastic drummer. I've seen him play live, both in a show and at a drum clinic. And one of the things I noticed was he has his snare drum up really high. And I would have thought, given that you're looking for force on a snare drum, often, not all the time, there's dynamics in there, but I would have thought you'd want it lower. And his argument for having it up higher is that he has less distance to travel when he goes to hit his cymbals. So it's more ergonomic for him.
Yeah. And he plays traditional grip.
Traditional grip. So that might have something to do with it as well. Yeah. Me with what I know about posture, I would have thought that wouldn't work, but that clearly works for him. And I don't know for sure. I'd love to ask him if he's ever had injuries, but I haven't read anything or seen any interviews with him where he's discussed it. So,
well, I'm going to be interviewing him. I'll be interviewing him soon. So we'll talk about some questions I can ask him about. Hopefully he'll come by and visit with us at the NAMM Show. And the thing about Todd's playing that really got me, the first time I saw Todd play live a few years ago, I was unbelievably amazed. I have no words for how amazed I was by how hard he hits the snare drum with his left hand, playing traditional grip. And I don't understand what's keeping the stick in his hand. I don't understand how he hits it like this so hard that the stick just doesn't fly out of that cradle. I don't get it. I just don't get it. So we'll talk to him about that as well. And then
Yeah.
you take Nico McBrain, who's 5 inches taller than I am, at least. He's probably 6'1", 6'2", maybe. And he plays like he's sitting on a milk crate. His butt and his waist has got to be this much lower than where his knees are at. It's like, I don't get it. It's really weird. And it might be that some people start out playing a certain way, and over the course of 20 years, their body might change and all that, but how they sit doesn't, because they're just so used to it. Maybe, I think that's the case with me. I've changed only slightly over the last 20 years of where I sit. And I certainly haven't grown in the last 20 years. So let's see if there's any more questions. Some crackpot is hacking the feed. Jessica Azar. Who's that?
That's my sister-in-law.
Yeah, I figured. I see Dory on there too.
Yeah,
Nadia's
she's mine.
very talented architect husband. Hey, Dory, thanks for joining us. I don't see any more questions. So, folks, if you are watching this on the archive or you get the courage after, I do see a question that I'll ask in just a moment. Go ahead and submit it. Nadia and I will be cruising through this post in the comments over the next couple of days. Jerome Baraska, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He says thighs should be at a 35-degree downward slope towards the bass drum while the feet are on the pedals. I don't know how someone can give and I'm not saying you, Jerome, because I'm sure you got that from somewhere, but from wherever you got it from, with all due respect to you and them, I don't know how someone could put a blanket statement on posture, whether it's driving a car, whether it's riding a horse, whether it's playing the drums or anything, because our physiology is so different. Do you agree with that, Nadia?
I do to an extent. I think, so what we do know is there are ranges of joint angles that are optimal for producing muscle tension.
That makes sense, yeah.
And so, but to say, it's 35 degrees is maybe not,
specific.
I mean, I don't know, it could be accurate. I haven't studied it. I don't know.
Okay.
These are things that I would like to find out.
Yeah,
But
in fact, Jerome, I'm sorry, if you don't mind, Jerome, let us know where you got that. We'd both love to look into that, because if it's valuable information, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So, but there are definitely ranges where, you might want to hold a certain posture for the best mechanical advantage. So, for example, if you're doing, usually the recommendation is for setting up workstations, like standing at a table to work. If you're doing really fine work, usually the table is up higher, maybe at about elbow height. Whereas if you're doing more forceful work, you would want it lower so that you can get more mechanical advantage from larger muscle groups and body mass to help produce the force. So I agree that there probably are guidelines that we could come up with for ranges of motion. For example, your thighs should be somewhere between 35 to 55 degrees, or at least that, your thighs should be parallel to the floor or at a slight angle with your hips higher. I don't know. Again, I'm just,
And it's interesting because if you take Jerome's factoid of, wherever you got that from, what's interesting is that he's saying a 35 downward slope. But again, I've seen Nico very up close, and he's a taller guy, and his waist is definitely lower than his knees. So his legs are sloping up. And he doesn't walk like he's got any sort of problem, and he's in his 60s now. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's really an interesting topic to me. And I just want to mention that another gentleman, and Steve Palmer, I'll get your question in a moment. Tomas Lithin, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, says, so how should we sit? And I don't know what the answer is to that, but I replied, on your butt. Is that
that's a
medically
good place
correct?
to start.
Okay. And I'm not making light of the question, Tomas. I'm just having a little fun with you. But let's see who else had a question. Was Steve Palmer. I joined late. Have you talked about the 3 grips, German, French, and American, and the pros and cons? So we touched on that a little bit. I don't know how much you know about that or the pros and cons, but from my 2 cents, I sometimes play traditional grip depending on the kind of music I play. If I'm playing big band or swing, I'm going to play traditional grip, and I'm right-handed. If I'm playing most music I play, I play, my right hand is more of a German grip, while my left hand is more of a German grip on the snare and going around the toms, whereas my right hand is more French grip, riding on the cymbal and turning over and being more German grip when I'm playing the hi-hat. That's me. If I'm doing fast rolls on my toms around or on the snare or just a bucket of fish type of thing, the John Bonham flippity floppity, I'm always French grip. I've taken notice of this. When I switch from one to the other, in either of those cases, I don't notice any discomfort any which way. It seems like whatever I've chosen for whatever I'm doing is naturally comfortable. So I don't know if there's pros or cons for those three grips. I haven't learned that in my 48 years of drumming. Wow, I started before I was born.
Yeah, so I mean, this is part of what's so intriguing to me about doing research in this area is these are all fantastic questions and there are no answers other than lots of people's very educated opinions for having been in the drumming world for so long. But there aren't very many, if any, really evidence-based, scientifically driven recommendations for a lot of these things. So, with the question going back to, how should I sit? I don't know yet. I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. In thinking about it, in my opinion, I would think that you would want to be with your hips at your knees at hip height or lower, like the one person was saying, 35 degrees sloping down. Maybe not that specific angle, but if you're trying to take advantage, if you're trying to really stomp on the pedals to hit hard, okay, you're going to want to be able to take advantage of the weight, the mass of your legs to be able to help drive that. So it's not all muscle action. Right. And the best way to do that, like if you're seated, like if this is your hip and this is your knee, if you're seated like this, your muscles are gonna have to work harder to pull all that down. Right. Whereas if you're up higher, you have a better chance of taking more advantage of just gravity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Almost like the difference between pushing a dolly and pulling a dolly.
Right.
Or a cart or a trolley or whatever. I'm going to be right back, and Nadia is going to give you all a recap on what her drumming study was all about and some of the other things that she's discovered working with Mike Mangini, Tim Alexander, Casey Grillo. Why don't you kind of give them an overview, because that'll help them learn more about what we're going to talk about at the NAMM Show twice a day, streamed live for you all to participate in online or in person if you're there, and I'll be right back.
All right, Ben's letting me take over again. Okay, so I guess to summarize, as a lot of you probably already know, and a lot of you participated, and thank you for doing that, not quite a year ago, I had a survey going around asking people all kinds of questions about their experiences with drumming-related injuries and all the different sort of characteristics or habits that go along with the way they play the drums. And my goal with that was to try to find out just how prevalent are playing related injuries in percussionists who play the drum set. And the reason why I was focusing specifically on the drum set is that I had noticed that all the studies that were out there really focused on percussionists in general. There was nothing really specific to drummers, and I really wanted to fill that gap. So over the course of, it was February 1st, April 30th, I received 865 responses to my survey from all over the world, which was really pretty much triple what I was hoping to get, but very exciting. And so out of that, there was 831 surveys I was able to use. And what I was able to find out was within that sample of 831 drummers, 90% of which were male, the average, about 68% of the drummers reported a lifetime history of a playing related injury. So that means at some point in their career, in their life at the time of playing the drums, they experienced an injury that they would attribute to playing the drums. That's 68%, which is a lot. And 59% of those who reported, or of the sample in total, also said that not only once, but multiple times, at least twice or more. Some people reported many different playing related injuries. Yeah. The most affected areas were predictably the wrist was the most affected area, and the low back, which also was not entirely surprising, but maybe a little surprising that it was more so than in more areas of the upper limb. But 33%, where am I here? 59% of the sample had an upper limb injury, 33% had a back injury, and it was 25% with the wrist, 24% with the low back. So those are kind of the big findings that came out of just how common are the injuries and where are the most common injuries. I asked all kinds of questions about, like I said, playing habits, lifestyle habits. Do you exercise? Do you warm up? Do you cool down? Do you play open-handed, cross-handed, traditional grip, all these different things? I haven't gotten to really in depth with all that data. As you can imagine, it was a ton of data. Yeah. So I'm still kind of trying to work through that, but I'm trying to look for relationships between those different characteristics and reporting certain types of injuries.
This is a lot of stuff there.
It is a lot of stuff. So I am slowly getting through that. But I mean, at least this is a starting point. There's all these anecdotal reports of drummers who have experienced, playing related injuries. We've all heard of, high profile cases of people who have awful injuries who may have to stop playing because of their injuries. And so I wanted to get a handle on how common was this. And I think I've done that. So That's good. And so my next step is to see, okay, what are the relationships between these characteristics? Can we come up with a set of risk factors, like these particular characteristics are associated with a higher risk of reporting an injury versus these others that are associated with a lower risk. So they might actually be something that's protecting you. But this is, years of research to come. So
yeah, and I see another question that I missed. Melissa is asking, do you think someone being very small and petite has anything to do with the tendonitis or the cyst in the wrist?
I don't necessarily think so, because if that was the case, I mean, women are, in general, I'm generalizing, but in general, women are more petite than men. And so if just being of a smaller stature was highly related to that, then almost all women who play the drums would have some kind of injury.
That's true. Yeah.
So I don't necessarily think that it's being petite that's the issue. But that combined with potentially technique, potentially playing hours. One thing that's come out of other studies on musicians' injuries is that playing time, especially when you have an abrupt change in how many hours you're playing per week, like say you've got a big performance coming up, or students, partway through the semester when they're ramping up for their final performance evaluation, when you ramp up the practice time, because you're stressing those tissues more, you're more likely to develop an injury. So it could be that, and it could be any combination of those things too.
Yeah.
So if you've got, high repetition, playing a particular style of music and, practicing a lot to try to get the piece down, that could be part of it. But yeah.
I think back to, and I'll check comments again if you folks have questions. Don't be shy. We're only saying it here on Facebook where we have 1 million followers.
Where everyone knows.
I think back to when I was playing between 14 and 20 hours a week, and I don't recall ever feeling like I was acquiring any sort of injury. However, I was also much, much younger. And while I was still, for the most, not all of that time an adult, but from 15 to 29, or at least 25, I played 14 to 20 hours a week. I don't remember any sort of related injury. Whereas now I feel some things, a little bit here and there, and I'm not playing nearly as much. In fact, sometimes the only time I play is when I do my almost daily vlog, which is 3 to 4 times a week. And sometimes that's the only time I get to play, because I'm just so busy.
But that could be related to it as well, Dan. Like think about exercising, right? If you go for months without going to the gym, and then you go and hit the weights, you are going to be sore.
Right. That makes sense.
Whereas if you're working, right? But if you're used to working out, 2-3 times a week consistently, I mean, if you have a particularly heavy workout, you're probably still going to have some soreness, but it's not going to be as bad as it is because you're conditioned.
That
you're
makes
used
sense.
So, if you were still playing, even say like, half an hour or an hour a day, you probably wouldn't feel those same aches and strains and things like that, because your body would be more conditioned for it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I should be playing more. Let's check the comments one more time. Let's see. So Jerome, again, is commenting, saying, think about the suspension travel on a vehicle. You want your body in a neutral position, not maxed in either direction. Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Very good point. Stay adaptable.
Yeah. Neil Curry says, lots of data, but looking forward to results and possible solutions. Absolutely. And certainly grips and placement of fulcrum will be a major factor. Thank you. So Jerome also says, wear gloves to reduce shock. Look at construction workers using a jackhammer. Well, this is my personal take, and thank you for your comments. My personal take is I could never wear gloves and play drums. I couldn't do it. But I don't say that people who do that are wrong. I would never say that about someone's own personal preference. Unless I adopted what my dad used to say was, you're entitled to your own opinion, even if it's wrong. But that's not how I feel about this. Me personally, I can't get my head around wearing gloves. I need to feel the sticks, and it's also just habit. I mean, I'm 55. I've been playing 48 years. Like, how much am I really going to change unless I really want to? But that is good input. I appreciate that, Jerome.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Dan. And part of where I see a lot of this going is, as I do start hopefully finding some solutions, like the example of gloves is a good point. And your point is well taken of, I've been playing this long, I don't want to wear gloves. But I'm thinking about the kids who are just starting out, and, the teachers who, if we can instill some of these habits, like you wouldn't wear gloves now because you've never worn them, and that would feel very foreign to you, and you'd have to really get used to that. It would change your playing. A kid who's just starting out, if it was like, okay, you need to go and buy a pair of drumsticks, and while you're there, get a pair of gloves. And they don't know any different. Yeah. It's just like, the NHL rules when they brought in, they grandfathered in having to wear helmets. And the ones who've been around forever were like, I'm not wearing a helmet. That's ridiculous. And now, now everyone wears a helmet. Not only that, they're all wearing visors. And eventually, they're thinking that they might wear the full cage. And, kids grow up playing hockey. They have to, it's mandatory. They wear a cage. They have to. There's just no choice. And so they grow up being used to that. Yeah. And that's what they know. And that's a great
analogy. Someone starting from scratch is a whole different thing than someone changing, over time.
Right, and that's where I see a lot of this hopefully going is as I do hopefully start getting some sense of, okay, maybe we shouldn't be teaching this type of technique anymore, or maybe we should particularly be teaching this kind of technique, that it's not that necessarily, all drummers should now change and do this, but maybe we can start teaching, someone who's just starting out, that if we start teaching them in the right way, then we can help avoid it. One of my favorite sayings is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
If we can teach people how to prevent injuries, it's way easier to prevent an injury than it is to fix
cure one. Yeah. Very good analogies. And Paul Grossman just joined us. He says, just tuning in on this. He's 27 years old. He's been drumming for 20 years. 3 weeks ago, I played a 4-hour gig. I'm a very hard hitter, and the gig caused me to have intersectional tendonitis, according to the hand surgeon I saw. I have a 4-hour gig let me see where I left off. Sorry, I had to expand it. Bear with me. I have a 4-hour gig this Friday and a 3-hour gig the next day. I'm worried about not being able to make it all the way through, or worse, re-injuring my wrist and worsening the tendonitis. The doctor said the doctor said I need to rest. He didn't write it all stuttery. That was me. The doctor said I need to rest as much as possible, so I have not played the drums since the injury. Should I play the drums for a bit each day this week and get my hands and wrists back in shape before I play this weekend? I would think yes, but what do you say, doctor?
So this is an example of the kind of question that is difficult for me to answer because a medical doctor has told him to rest.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say anything in contravention to that. What I would say is that this is where a physiotherapist might be a good person to consult. Because from what I know about injuries is that absolute rest is not good either. Like, you don't want to keep playing and for sure re-injure, but you also don't want to completely stop dead and decondition. So there's a happy medium in there. I am not qualified to tell you what that happy medium is, but a physiotherapist is. And so that's maybe someone who you could consult with to find out. They may not be able to tell you, like, yes, play 15 minutes a day, but they might be able to say, you know, yeah, you should at least try playing a little bit gently up until the point where it starts to hurt and then stop. But that's for them to make that kind of recommendation. But they are the experts in rehabilitation. So they are the ones that you might want to consult with to find out, you know, what is that happy medium of I need to rest enough that my tissue heals, but I also need to, you know, move enough that, you know, I don't build up scar tissue and that everything keeps moving the way it needs to and things like that. And moving in a way that's actually going to promote healing and not potentially re-injure. So yeah, that's a perfect example of the kind of question that's tough for me to answer without overstepping my boundaries. So I would say consult a physiotherapist to get a much better answer than what I can give.
Great, thank you, Nadia. And Paul, thank you for sharing your story. And I'd be curious to know, A, what kind of music you play, and B, what are these 2, 3, and 4 hour gigs? I used to do that way back in the day. Most gigs I see today aren't that long, so I'd be curious to know. You can answer here, you can private message me. I still have some room for personal Facebook friends, and easy to find. It's just my name. So yeah, that's very interesting. There's a bunch of new comments, so let's see what else real quick. And Melissa said thank you for that answer earlier. Jeff Azar says, I do really long gigs too. Looking forward to this answer. Cool. Hopefully that was helpful. Although, Jeff, you are a little bit connected there. Neil also says, some of us mature players, I'm 65, have open minds, but find it difficult to physically change some of our approaches. I agree with that. I went through a major sort of, even though I said, you know, I'm 55, how much am I going to change? Well, about 5 years ago, I made a major change to how my drum set was set up. I lowered a lot of things and made things not as extravagantly distant. And that really helped my playing. That very much helped my playing. Let's see. Jerome says, whoops, where'd it go? Wear ear protection too. Take the YouTube hearing test to see where your hearing's at. It gets worse with age. I'm going to touch on something that I'm going to, and then I'll read some more comments. Thanks everybody for all the participation. I'm really excited about what Nadia and I are going to be doing together at the NAMM Show all 4 days. And Nadia is going to be back doing this, just like this, on December 20th, right? It's the same day of the month?
Yeah.
December 20th.
Earlier in the day.
Same
I think it's at noon.
You're right. It is at noon Pacific time. Yes. Right? Let me look. Hold on. I got the calendar.
I think it's at noon Eastern time.
Yeah, noon Pacific on the 20th. What I was going to mention is, two things. So regarding ear protection and tendonitis, I'm studying something that I recently found that says, not tinnitus, sorry. That tinnitus is not necessarily caused by constant loud noise. That tinnitus is caused by lack of a certain fat cell around the nerves in a certain part of the ear. Something like that. I'm actually studying it right now because I want to reach out to these people if it doesn't turn out to be just some, you know, old wives' tale or hoodwink old myth or something. If there's proper science behind this, so I have these people on the show. I happen to suffer from severe tendonitis. And I often wonder what life would be like without this constant frequency in my ear that not only changes with volume, but changes with pitch, and sometimes changes with velocity. Sometimes for a moment I'll feel like there's someone blowing in my ear. I'll look, my wife's not there, I don't see a ghost, and it's the tinnitus. I keep saying tendonitis, sorry. So I'm really interested in that topic as well. Going back to tendonitis, have you ever heard whether or not acupuncture is a treatment for tendonitis? Is that a legitimate process people can seek out?
Tendonitis specifically, I don't know, but I do know that acupuncture is pretty good at relieving pain.
Okay.
So whether or not it reduces the inflammation and actually deals with the problem, I don't know.
Okay.
Could it help with managing some of the pain so that you can do more physio or that sort of thing? Possibly.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thanks. Very helpful. Thank you. Let's look at a few others. So Pat Close is also replying to Paul and says, ice really helps. Danielle Elizabeth Barkman says, I can't hear you laugh out loud. I'm often saying that. I swear, half the time it sounds like, and you've met my wife, she's for the most part, she's what Jerry Seinfeld would refer to as a low talker. She talks soft. And my hearing's bad. So half the time it sounds like she's underwater. And it's not because I'm blocking her out. It's just, and I'm always asking her to repeat herself. And then I get a abbreviated version. I said, wait, you said more syllables before. I didn't hear what you said, but I know it wasn't that. Give me the same thing, just louder. Heinz Kronberger, thanks for joining. Hope you're well. It looks like that might be all the questions. I'm just doing a quick cruise through to make sure. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining Nadia and myself. We really appreciate it. Share this to somebody who you think it might be helpful for if they have any sort of drumming injury whatsoever, including lugging their stuff or putting up with the lead singer, getting a headache. It's usually going to be a back-of-the-head headache. So, Nadia, thank you so much. I'm so excited about what we're going to be doing at the NAMM Show. Folks, if you missed that, rewind this, watch it. A lot of value in this conversation interview. I guarantee it. Really appreciate it. And, Nadia, thanks for taking time out. Well, I was going to say thanks for taking time out while you're at work at the University of Windsor, but I guess you don't mind that, right?
No, I mean, this is part of my work, so
That's right.
It's all good. But no, thank you for having me. I always like coming on, so appreciate it.
Thanks.
I'm super excited to be coming to NAMM.
Yeah, absolutely. And hang on the line after we say goodbye. And thank you, everybody, so much for following what we do. Sign up for our newsletter. Gilbert is going to drop that link in there right now. Follow the newsletter. It's static-free. It's cling-free. It's fat-free. It's MSG-free. It's gluten-free. Just get the newsletter. If you don't like what you get, bail. But get the newsletter because you'll get sneak peeks at stuff well in advance. You'll get other information that we don't publish publicly to everybody, and it's a lot of fun. And just get the newsletter. Thanks, everybody. See you soon. It's so clunky the way this